Well, it appears that Hillbilly Elegy is once again number one on the Amazon list of bestsellers for books. Of course, it's written by J.D. Vance, and he was just recently chosen to be the vice president nominee for the Republican Party by presidential nominee Donald Trump. The only thing, when I was writing an article about 4 years or so ago, is that I had a lot of problems with that book and the movie itself. I felt like there was a lot of things that were incorrectly assumed about that. And I'll read from Wikipedia to kind of give a little background on it. It says that in 2020 it was adapted into the film Hillbilly Elegy, directed by Ron Howard and starring Glenn Close and Amy Adams. And from there, the summary says Vance described his upbringing and family background while growing up in Middleton, Ohio. He writes about a family history of poverty and low-paying physical jobs that have since disappeared or worsened in their guarantees, and compares this life with his perspective of after leaving it. Though Vance was raised in Middletown, his mother and his family came from Breathitt County, Kentucky. Their Appalachian values included traits like loyalty and love of country despite social issues, including violence and verbal abuse. He recounts his grandparents' alcoholism and abuse and his unstable mother history of drug addiction and failed relationships. Vance's grandparents eventually reconciled and became his de facto guardians. His strict but loving grandmother pushed him, and eventually Vance was able to leave Middletown to enter Ohio State University and Yale Law School. Alongside his personal history, raises questions about the responsibility of his family and people for their misfortune. And here's where I kind of differ, as Vance blames hillbilly culture and his supposed encouragement of social rot. That's a pretty hard statement. Comparatively, he feels that economic insecurity plays a much lesser role. To lend credence to his argument, Vance regularly relies on personal experience. As a grocery store checkout cashier, he watched welfare recipients talk on cell phones, although the working Vance could not afford one. His resentment of those who seemed to profit from poor behavior while he struggled, especially combined with his value of personal responsibility and tough love, is presented as a microcosm of the reason for Appalachia's overall political swing from strong Democratic Party to strong Republican affiliations. Likewise, he recounts stories intended to showcase a lack of work ethic, including the story of a man who quit after expressing dislike over his job's hours and posted to social media about the Obama economy, as well as co-worker with a pregnant girlfriend who would skip work. So what I wanted to bring as kind of maybe a counter argument, I was kind of a hillbilly that grew up in the Ozarks, and I had a job and employment in Appalachia, and also later on I did cable TV software that I sold into Appalachia, and so I once again visited Appalachia. So I have a good understanding of living in Appalachia, living in the Ozarks, and working in Appalachia, and working in the Ozarks. So I think I can raise a very solid counter argument, but also I can give a real life story of a family that had varying issues that he discussed, but were successful in still living in the Ozarks or living in Appalachia. If you stay with the podcast, I think there's some interesting stories. I concluded with a story that my brother, who passed over 10 years ago, he had written an article about being a fixed base operator, and one of his key pilot, how he was killed in, in an accident, and he detailed all the issues that happened as a co-pilot. It was in a jet, a really one of the better jets of the time, and probably same today. But I think the detail that he wrote at that time, I just came across that when I reread this article. Again, it was written over 4 years ago, and I'm sure most people probably discounted it because this guy, he's got Parkinson's, and he probably doesn't understand it. But I think you'll find out my credentials are probably second to none, and much better than in what Vance has. So enjoy. All right, for the audio podcast, I wanted to include a picture of me in my boxing gloves with saying fight, and then also a billboard of the movie Hillbilly Elegy with Amy Adams and Glenn Close.
Written by J.D. Vance, was on the New York Times bestseller in 2016 and 2017. As you can determine from the movie poster and trailer, it's also a recent Netflix movie release. A Ron Howard film with some great acting from Amy Adams and an unrecognizable Glenn Close.
Spoiler alert, movie is depressing.
Vance's message is specifically about his family and overcoming adversity. My interest came from the condescending discussions about rural America that's being generated by the book and movie. Hillbilly is a term often derogatory for people who dwell in rural mountainous areas in the United States, primarily in southern Appalachia and the Ozarks. While Hillbilly Elegy's critical response has been more than a little rough, the audience is certainly here for the film, as the movie recently became the #1 item being viewed on Netflix in the U.S. Cinema Blend. There are several YouTube clips on J.D. Vance and the book. Vance has become the de facto expert on the problems of hillbilly culture and their economic prospects. Vance suggests that unemployment, drug addiction, and faltering industries are self-inflicted wounds. Hillbillies to Vance have become a case of learned helplessness. That because of all the issues they face from the start, there is nothing they can do to improve their circumstances. What is the impact on rural economic development, the things that are missed? Middletown is 35 miles from Cincinnati, where there was a diversity of jobs corporate headquarters for P&G, Kroger, telecommunications, insurance, etc. Vance was born in Middletown and went to school there. The Eastern Kentucky Hillbilly connection had been in his family's rearview mirror for several years. Vance did spend some summers there. Hard to see how culturally he was impacted by hillbilly image and unable to handle social events, that having associated with classmates, friends, and neighbors in Middletown most of his life. Mainly issues were with his mother and her drug issues. White rural trash easier to trash than suburban trash. Middletown was a mainly, though by no means exclusively, white, blue-collar, middle-income town. Hard to categorize as hillbillies with its list of notable people ranging from William Gross, financier at Yanis Capital Group, Pimco to Chris Carter, Hall of Fame NFL player to Jerry Lucas, Ohio State and NBA basketball player to McGuire sisters, Christine, Dorothy, and Phyllis, vocal trio. The issue shifts to more from an urban problem to a white suburban community near Cincinnati and less an eastern Kentucky hillbilly issue. Easier to sell books and make movies about those dreaded hillbillies. Vance was born in Middletown, Ohio, and grew up there. He was far removed from the culture that he criticizes. Jackson, Kentucky, Appalachia, with a population of slightly over 2,000, would be similar to Huntsville, Arkansas, Ozarks. Some of the other similarities would be proximity to university towns. Jackson to UK and Lexington, Kentucky, and Huntsville to UA in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Another comparison would be the Newton County families who moved to Kansas City. Missouri to Kansas City, Mo to find employment common in Newton County obituaries, easy to visualize on a map as well as understand the culture shock. This happened more frequently than most people realize. History. I'm very familiar with the Ozarks of Arkansas and the Appalachian influence on eastern Kentucky. I was an operations research analyst for Ashland Oil and lived in Ashland, Kentucky in the early 70s. Ashland adjoined Huntington, West Virginia later on, selling cable TV customer care and billing to several cities in Appalachia. Ashland, Huntington, and Ironton, Ohio metropolitan area has a population of over 360,000. Unfortunately, with an oil refinery and steel mills, there was pollution. Would have been a closer option for the Vance family with much less culture shock. One good thing about Kentucky education was the consolidation into one school per county. I worked with several professionals educated in eastern Kentucky schools, and their skills were as good or better than many. Professionals that I worked with in D.C., Lexington, Kentucky, University of Kentucky, was a little over an hour from Jackson. The issue in Appalachia was that natural gas has replaced coal. Vance's grandparents moved to Middletown, Ohio to work in a steel mill. Steel was impacted by global prices. When the manufacturing jobs left Middletown, however, the remaining residents became crowded into suburban ghettos. The numbers tell the story. In 1970, 25% of white children lived in poor neighborhoods. By 2000s, that figure was 40% and growing rapidly. In popular imagination, this kind of poverty and economic segregation is associated with racial minorities in inner-city communities. But by 2011, residents of poor neighborhoods were more likely to be white. As Vance observes, bad neighborhoods are no longer an exclusively urban problem. Increasingly, many of America's suburbs and rural areas have become marked by unemployment, poverty, high foreclosure rates, welfare dependency, crime, high divorce rates, and drug and alcohol addiction. These are key problems in Middletown, Ohio's history. Boomerang economy effect. See if you have heard this before. Economic development plans in Appalachia. As the COVID-19 pandemic pushes more people to work remotely, communities like Fayetteville, West Virginia hope to attract new residents who can do their jobs while living in a beautiful region in close proximity to recreation opportunities. In doing so, the town is competing against numerous other coal communities, trying to emulate its relative success by using outdoor recreation as one strategy to diversify their economies. Dozens of communities in the Appalachian coal economy have been plotting a course beyond coal for decades, relying on local culture, outdoor recreation, tech jobs, and a skilled labor force to expand their economies. Update December 4th, 2020. Recent article in local paper HDT talked about people coming to Harrison area renting one-way U-Hauls. Definitely a pandemic impact. Excerpt for non-subscribers. Jeff Crockett, former mayor, said, "The people renting trucks and trailers in other locations from diverse states, California, Colorado, Florida, North Carolina, are moving to the area. No return trip is booked. How does he know they are moving? With conversations we have in the office when they drop them off," he said. People say they want to get away from the big cities. The COVID-19 pandemic has taught them something. They can work from anywhere with internet access and no longer need to live within driving distance of the office building where they went every day. Jeff Pratt, Harrison City Clerk, owner of Jerry Jackson Realty and a member of the Harrison Board of Realtors, agreed the housing market in the area is an issue. Pratt said the Board of Realtors' multiple county coverage area listed 136 residential properties for sale last week, about half of which were in Boone County. A couple of years ago, that cumulative number would have been 600. "Our inventory is gone," Pratt said. "Houses selling for under $200,000 tend to leave the market almost as soon as listed. Of the 71 residential properties in Boone County, 12 were under $100,000. 27 fall into the $100,000 to $200,000 category, and 32 were priced over $200,000. Sometimes potential buyers in other states can't get here fast enough when a property in the area is listed. A buyer in California might not be able to make flight arrangements to Boone County to look at a potential property before it sells. So the property is shown via Zoom. In some cases, the buyers make offers on a piece of real estate they've never even seen in person. The potential that I have written about for years is now a reality. Technology people are constantly reinventing themselves and can locate where there is great broadband, Utah has a great understanding of those opportunities. Other states do not, few exceptions in Austin, Omaha, Seattle, Denver, Orlando, etc. Most end up on the east and west coast. Great opportunity for those communities who recognize and understand the new economy. Most communities will mishandle the opportunity. In technology, you have to reinvent yourself many times during your career. Ashland Oil was an interesting company. They were called the exception. They made their money from refining and marketing oil, not from production. They were, in effect, lousy at finding oil. I helped develop a least cost supply and distribution model, saving the company hundreds of millions. Remember how modern math had been trashed. Well, I was actually using matrix algebra to solve business problems.
It helped determine the best place to swap oil with other companies. A way of using technology to horse trade petroleum products in order to get it to the service stations in locations remote to their refineries.
Destination zip codes along with modes of transporting petroleum products were considered, including pipelines, barges, and tankers. Oil companies, insurance, and the government were virtually the only places with computers and the resources to give on-the-job training. Not a bad idea to initially work for leaders in the industry or type of work that interests you. Another side benefit was my opportunity to work in the Department of Planning and Analysis. I learned a lot about how deals were structured for acquisitions, something I had to deal with when I sold my company. They bought and sold businesses much like my dad bought and sold TVs and appliances. Ashland Oil owned Valvoline, so quite frequently Indy drivers such as a Jay Foyt came to Ashland. President Nixon came to Ashland October 26, 1972, and spoke at the local high school gym. I got tickets and attended. I remember Nixon's shoulders being slumped over and the gym being warm. That's about all. Tickets were very hard to get unless you worked for Ashland Oil. Nixon had done very limited campaigning. Due to the time he was spending with Vietnam and the fact that he was so far ahead of McGovern in the polls, Watergate was starting to have rumblings in the media. But no one thought Nixon could be that stupid and arrogant in a race he was winning with virtually no effort. It also marked the first presidential visit to Ashland since Harry Truman had visited 24 years previously. The Ashland Oil president was later connected to some illegal contributions to the Nixon campaign. Fortunately, that was something I knew nothing about at the time. So I'm sure with my CIA background, there was speculation that I had been involved. Most people have the idea that once you work for the agency, you never leave. Our daughter, Christy, was born in Ashland. There was an early diagnosis that she was born with oral facial digital syndrome by the Med Center in Lexington. So my family's return to Harrison was a highly personal one. I returned to the Ozarks to set up a technology company. I was making much more money at Ashland Oil, and it was a great job. Part of the reasons came from analyzing the economic opportunity. The IBM System 3 Model 10 was available for use in small to medium businesses. The price of the system was over $100,000. In a world of million-dollar mainframes, that computer was cheap. But the primary reason was personal. Our second child, a daughter, was born with birth defects in Ashland, Kentucky. She had a rare syndrome called oral facial digital, which brought with it physical and mental abnormalities. Returning home to be with family made the unknowns much easier to face. You can never fail by putting family first. You can go home again, but don't think it's easy. Learning a lot about disabilities and being pulled up by a community versus being drugged down. Hard to imagine living anywhere else when your child has both knees replaced and a kidney transplant. And lives a life of special needs, returning to the Ozarks. My dad, Joe Lair, had a service station and a TV and appliance store that provided me a base to build a technology business from. It was located 5.5 miles south of Harrison. Very near location where I was born. Dr. Ross Fowler, a cousin of my dad, delivered me at home. No doubt there was some type of barter gas, oil, tires, etc. for the delivery. Overcoming false conclusions generated by Vance. Hillbillies to Vance have become a case of learned helplessness, that because of all the issues they face from the start, there is nothing they can do to improve their circumstances. Diversification of skills was critical for survival. Being a jack of all trades and a master of none was a very common way of life in the Ozarks. Everything we attempted in the family business, from sales to service, was being done for survival. Have you ever had a job where how well you do your work could directly impact your lifestyle and maybe even your next meal? Keeping an open mind and looking over the range of opportunities as well as evaluating new opportunities is important. Give urgency to the importance of doing a good job or trying something new. Treat your work as if your next meal depends on it, because it may. In corporate America today, most people have never faced a high risk-reward situation. If they treated every customer like their next meal depended on it, there would be minimum customer service problems. Some of those ideas and techniques later became important in how to sell globally. It is difficult to do business internationally by totally depending on specialists. It is too expensive to have an entourage of people traveling and presenting your products for every interested prospect. The Swiss Army knife approach, developing cross-trained skills, is the key. Long hours. Today, a lot of the productivity we're seeing comes not only from technology, but the use of technology to extend our offices and office hours. Access through smartphones, cellular, voicemail, email, and pagers have created 24/7 office hours. 1950s and early 60s. The use of the atomic bomb in World War II and the nuclear race between the U.S. and Russia created an opportunity to sell and construct bomb shelters. Until the Y2K scare, this had to be the largest phantom situation that had captured the interest of the public on a local, national, and international level. Anytime I was asked to speak or comment on Y2K, I would tell them about all the preparations for nuclear war and how it got out of hand. We were not only building shelters, but were asked to store canned goods and supplies that would be required to survive a nuclear holocaust. Does this sound familiar? High school. The biggest change to my education came as a result of Sputnik. History changed on October 4th, 1957, the year before I entered high school, when the Soviet Union successfully launched Sputnik Y. The world's first artificial satellite was about the size of a basketball, weighed only 183 pounds, and took about 98 minutes to orbit the Earth on its elliptical path. That launch ushered in new political, military, technological, and scientific developments. It marked the start of the space age and the U.S.-USSR space race. In 1962, on my birthday, and in the same year I was graduating from high school, John Glenn successfully orbited the Earth. We were starting to catch up, and President Kennedy had made the commitment to landing a man on the moon and safely returning him before the end of the 60s. The space race was now in full force. Modern math was introduced with the idea of catching up with the Soviets. It generally had a bad reputation, but the idea was good. I was able to attend a National Science Foundation summer program with other math students across the country, and afterwards I decided to enter college as a math major instead of engineering. Television. Prior to cable, broadcast television in the rural areas was little more than shadowy figures on a snowy background. Television stations were as far away as 150 to 200 miles. My earliest remembrance was watching television beam from Tulsa and Memphis. Generally, you could watch programming from at most 2 different channels or networks. My father bought a Philco TV well before he started his business, studied the opportunities. Knew he would have to be able to provide services in addition to selling TVs, such as installing antennas and repairing TVs. Early color television was limited to just a few programs such as Rose Parade and Bonanza. Many times we had people come to our house to watch those shows. When a television station came on the air in Springfield, Missouri, it would sign on in the afternoon and stay on until midnight. My dad was building interest in the new medium. Getting there first with a good idea is generally more than 95% of what's necessary to market a new idea. I think we have seen the same principle in computer software and the internet, where software and services were given away free to build a market. Cable TV. Then there was cable. Harrison had one of the first cable systems in the country. Many consider the cable system that originated in Batesville, Arkansas, as the first. Cable in the early days was generally referred to as KATV, Community Antenna Television. Some systems were privately owned and developed, and others were built through cooperatives. From the beginning, cable TV represented a field of dreams in that cable operators would build a system and the subscribers immediately came. There was sufficient pent-up demand to attain high percentages of viewers from the homes past. TV viewers in remote locations were watching snowy pictures and wanted more. My dad's favorite golfing buddy, Bob Wheeler, started the local cable system.
This relationship became important when I returned to Arkansas to start my computer service bureau business.
Computer Service Bureau, similar to the cloud in today's lingo. Pay-as-you-go, we initially operated as a service bureau. Computer time was bought at locations as far away as Springfield, Missouri, 75 miles one way. If you were taking key punch cards 75 miles one way, you had to be accurate and efficient. There was no way to survive if you were sloppy in any way. Within 6 months, there were IBM System 3s going in at the Bank of Yellville, 25 miles away, and in Harrison at Guarantee Savings and Loan. Computer time was bought and access was contracted. My service bureau software was from Western Union Computer Utilities, WCU. They had an idea of franchising software and a method of selling accounting services in your local community. I was the exception, much like Ashland Oil, in that I was located in a rural area and the others were located in large metropolitan areas such as St. Louis, New Orleans, Tulsa, Atlanta, etc. The company, WCU and Concept, soon failed, but in order to prevent lawsuits, WCU had to give the franchisees the source code. Sometimes in order to survive, you may be given a lemon and you have to make lemonade. I have made my quota of lemonade. We flourished with our business at the time other franchisees were going out of business. We modified the code to handle input and output for a variety of businesses while maintaining the core code. Unusual bedfellows, be prepared to expect the unexpected. The business you assume you will get when you return to your home area or go into business may not happen. Family or friends may not want you to know about their business. My biggest business came initially from a theme park, Dog Patch, named after the fictitious location created in the A.L. Cap comic strip of the same name, a concept that later failed for a variety of reasons, including the lackadaisical support of A.L. Cap. Other Service Bureau accounts included payrolls, medical billing, school accounting, college accounting, manufacturing, water systems, mailing labels, oil jobber, and cable TV. I was the technology jack of all trades and master of none. Many times the dog patch image of Arkansas is used by educators to improve their budgets and by government officials to justify their inefficiencies. I call it a cop-out. Places such as Utah and Bangalore, India have proven to be technology-friendly, even without a history of having world-class educational institutes or even the high-tech educational factories to turn out the workers. If the economic situation is good and the quality of life is good, you can get the workers. I found in my visit to New Delhi to be very informative. Highly educated people who had studied in the U.S. and even worked in the U.S. but preferred to live in their homeland were returning to India. Why? India was making it more attractive than staying in the U.S. Technology companies were given numerous tax incentives. Pay was very good in comparison. They were close to family, and they were able to do things more culturally acceptable to them. Whether that included eating a formal meal with their hands, marriages arranged by parents, or attending cricket matches, choosing the right business to focus on. My reasons for selecting the cable business was the timing of entrance into the in-house billing solution. Early cable subscriber management and billing solutions from 1948 through 1973 were highly manual in nature, with all work orders handwritten and payments posted over several days on ledger cards. Coupon books were commonly used and monthly bills were less than $5 during cable's first 25 years. Other than over-the-air broadcasters, there was no competition for viewers. Having a computerized cable billing system was seen as an unnecessary expense. Then the next 10 years, 1973 to 1983, some automation started creeping into the subscriber management process, but it was nevertheless limited. The $100,000 million cinema cost of an in-house computer with less capabilities than today's $2,000 PC was far from practical. Service bureaus dominated processing batches of data and mailing bills from remote locations. Data was key-punched and sent by couriers or over dial-up modems. Outside competitors to cable programming such as VCRs and satellite services were still in their infancy, but beginning to grow in importance. Signal scrambling for new pay TV services provided via satellite in the mid and late 70s created revenue opportunities for operators. They needed systems to handle the pay options, including pay-per-view. In-house solution for cable TV. A new system announced late in the 70s was the IBM Series C mini computer. This system allowed us to go in-house with our solution. We had to change our skills from running jobs in-house under our complete control to having our customers run our application software with backup from our customer support. Communication, observation, training, and problem-solving skills were pushed to a higher level since most of the support was done verbally over a telephone. Modems and even fax machines were still in limited use at this time. Management and developers, due to complexity and necessity to guarantee customer satisfaction and to ensure fast collection of account receivables, did. Installations. These skills, both in management and development, proved instrumental in getting our international business off the ground. We, in effect, totally changed our business. We went from a service bureau to software developers. No one locally realized how radical a change this was. We went from operational skills to development skills, which required a substantial amount of creativity. Sidebar on creativity. It can come from anyone at any time. My wife has a great personality and often sold cable systems just by being friendly and building relationships. I remember one instance when we were living in Washington, D.C. The Arkansas Razorback football team was playing on television. Unfortunately, the game was not being televised in D.C., but I found out you could see it in the Richmond area. Since we were just out of college and had very little money, we didn't want to spend money on a motel room just to watch a football game. When we got to Charlottesville, I attempted to watch the game at a TV store. I found out very quickly that watching there was going to be impossible. So my wife suggested that we go to a motel. She talked the manager into letting us have a room free for 3 hours. I'm not sure what she told him. She said she just told him the truth. I can only imagine what he thought. How creative. I wonder what he told his friends. I do know that I could never have pulled that off. Many times entrepreneurial opportunities are just a matter of not doing things the way they have always been done. Creativity. Changing the business model, advent of the PC caused companies to rethink their in-house solutions, particularly in the small to medium-sized cable systems. Scaling the solution was obviously a difficult transition. We went from selling a few large systems a year to many small systems. Sales which had come from a small number of $100,000 deals to the expectation of having many deals running in the tens of thousands of dollars. At the same time, in the mid-'80s, we were entering into my company's biggest financial challenge. I sold systems to several cable TV operators in eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, and Ohio. My view of the people in towns was much different than the one created by Vance in Hillbilly Elegy. I was personally involved in the installation of systems at Irvine, Elkhorn City, and Harlan, Kentucky. With apologies to New Yorkers, if you can make a technology company successful in rural America, you can make it anywhere. The Ozarks is not an ideal place to pursue your million. Small towns need to make technology their new best friends. My story is to detail the problems with the hope of educating small town leaders on what they must do to survive and prosper, how to get and keep key people in remote locations, how to operate with limited capitalization, how to use social media, how to focus on the right product, how to sell and market from and to remote locations, how to provide customer care, how to grow your company, how to persevere, how to exit successfully. Recently updated in LinkedIn article, Why There is Greater Interest in Living in Rural Communities Than Ever Before. Steps for business and professional success in a pandemic world, approach that investors are now expecting. My company was founded in a rural area where bank financing wasn't available for startup technology enterprises. You had to find investors or mortgage your personal property to provide any gap financing. My steps are actual and time-tested. All steps can be followed independently at your own schedule. or expedited by contacting and contracting consultants and advisors like myself. Lessons I learned from family businesses, federal government, big oil companies, and in running my own technology business in rural America. At the time that I sold my company, my cable TV subscriber management software was installed in over 50 countries, 3 times more than the nearest competitor. My business went from having 100% of my customers locally based to 0%. See international installations by clicking on link below. Dysfunctional family. Not to be outdone by J.D. Vance and his dysfunctional family, I'll mention some things about mine. Alcohol was my family's biggest problem, at least for my dad and brother. My brother Gene was 4 years older than me. From the beginning, he had many more entrepreneurial traits than me. He learned to repair TVs, restore automobiles, learn photography, including darkroom development, property development, real estate business, and even became a commercial pilot. Self-taught for the most part, everything he did was with the intention of maximizing his money-making capabilities from sales to profits. Early on, he allocated his time, energy, and money efficiently in ways conducive to building wealth. I did all the grunt works at the service station and TV and appliance business, from fixing tire flats to installing television antennas. I didn't look at anything as to how I could make the most money. I was more interested in academics, sports, and was a political idealist. Gene had a childhood accident when we were playing bow and arrows with a neighbor. Much like the BB gun warning in Christmas Story, you'll shoot your eye out. He lost an eye but still went on to be a commercial pilot, as well as the FBO at Boone County Airport. He died in February 2014 after several years of strokes and dementia. See addendum. Gene Lair, in his own words, reports on citation crash. Boone County Aviation suffered severe financial penalties due to the loss of their chief pilot. No doubt had a major impact on Gene's life. A lot of stories that my brother took to the grave with him. Local pilots who flew for Barry Seal at Mena. The Tom Cruise American Made is a good cinematic review of what was happening in Arkansas in the early 80s. Later on, Gene was arrested for printing counterfeit money. It was bizarre since it was done on an old printing press. Quality was terrible. He was turned in by one of many girlfriends that never amounted to anything. On February 22, 2000, and less than a month after the funeral of my mother, the following headline was in the local Harrison Daily Times. Men jailed $100,000 in bogus bills. By James L. White of the Times staff, a 60-year-old man was arrested on forgery charges after more than $100,000 in counterfeit money was found at his house near Bellefonte Monday.
A press release from Boone County Sheriff Danny Hickman said
Granville Gene Lair, 60, was charged with forgery Monday. Hickman also said Secret Service agents are continuing the investigation, acting on information obtained. Officers from the Sheriff's Office, Arkansas State Police, and Secret Service executed a search warrant on Lair's house at 2350 Hawkins Street behind Quality Feeds, a report shows. More than $100,000 in counterfeit 20 seconds, 50 seconds, 100 seconds, and printing press was found, broken down and in pieces, and all the money appeared to be old.
Lair told police he forgot it was still there.
Investigators said Secret Service agents said they had never seen such a printing operation in the field. Most counterfeit operations now use computers to reproduce money. Lair was being held in the Boone County Jail under $75,000 bail, officials said, but federal agents are following up on the case. I was only made aware of the arrest and charges the night before the newspaper article. My niece, Gene's daughter, who lives in Virginia, called informing me of the situation and asking me about attorneys. I made a call to the sheriff's office and talked with the sheriff. He talked about the charges and their seriousness, but also informed me that my brother had been treated with dignity. He wasn't handcuffed and he was allowed to ride in the front seat when he was arrested. The arrest was as dignified as it could be under the circumstances. During the week of my mother's funeral, January 2000s, Gene had been arrested and handcuffed by the city police after being stopped for a minor traffic violation. He had left his vehicle, big mistake, to argue with the policeman, and they took what they thought was an appropriate action, about as undignified as it could be under the circumstances. So I appreciated the sheriff's response. I had visited the chief of police after Gene's earlier arrest, and I asked for and received a copy of the report based on the time of day, 8:30 a.m., and location, intersection near the police station. That arrest and actions taken appeared to be unwarranted. Gene informed me he had gotten the counterfeiting idea from the local survivalist Kurt Saxon's book, The Poor Man's James Bond. Saxon is the self-proclaimed father of survivalism. Kurt had been one of my Service Bureau customers whom we had generated labels for mail-outs. Kurt appeared on many national TV programs. I did check his Service Bureau list after the Oklahoma City bombing, but McVeigh or none of the other names appeared. Although we were no longer printing labels at this time, I still had a diskette copy of Kirk's mailing list. I always felt he was a person seeking publicity, and not really a subversive. He has lost fingers experimenting with some explosive chemicals. He once came to my office, and when he was leaving, his car wouldn't start. Not only did he not have jumper cables, we had to hook the cables up and even start his car while he sat in my office. Didn't seem like a real survivalist, just an opportunist. I found the following on the internet. Would a real survivalist let someone get under the hood of his car? You be the judge. Blowing up a car. An article from the book.
It's The Poor Man's James Bond by Kurt Saxon.
The best methods of blowing up a car requires getting under the hood. Explosives are placed as near the occupants as possible. Note, this article is for those of you who are not content to psych out the driver with some practical joke. If you have his last ride in mind, then read on. The fuse, homemade, commercial or safety, is wrapped a few turns around the exhaust manifold. After a few minutes on the road, the exhaust manifold gets almost red hot and ignites the fuse. This way is more certain than wiring the car, because since it blows up on the road, the wreck will do the victim in, even if the blast doesn't. Besides, if the intended victim is a passenger instead of the driver may start the engine before the passenger gets into the car. You can see how embarrassing that would be to the bomber, can't you? I recall reading the poem If by Rudyard Kipling at my brother's funeral. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies. Or being hated, don't give way to hating. And yet, don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster, and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you, except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And, which is more, you'll be a man, my son.
Addendum. Written by Gene Lair.
The following is a true story. Actual names and events leading up to the conclusion of this story are used to recreate the catastrophe that occurred in 1980 near Harrison, Arkansas. In May 1985, the people in Harrison were visited by then Vice President Bush. He, Congressman Hammerschmidt, and other governmental officials arrived in Harrison to attend a ceremony at the North Arkansas Community College, where Vice President Bush made a speech. The government officials and employees have been transported to Harrison in two DC-9s. As the owner-manager of the fixed base operation for the Boone County Regional Airport, I witnessed the landing of the DC-9s. The weather was great that day, exceptionally clear for flying. Then, only 2 days later, the weather was foggy, drizzling, light rain, low cloud ceilings, and limited visibility. It was nasty flying weather. With little activity at the airport when I had left from work for home about 5 that afternoon, it was gloomy outside near 8:30 p.m. when my home phone rang. Ted Willis, an employee of Boone County Aviation, was on the line. "Gene, I think that something terrible has happened," Ted said in a nervous manner. "What seems to be the problem, Ted?" I quickly replied, "Junior and Floyd made an approach. It was really lousy flying weather when they tried to land. I watched the Citation fly down the runway. They were over halfway down the runway before I caught sight of them, and they were too high to land, so they aborted their landing attempt. Inside, I heard them on the scanner telling center that they missed the approach. They asked to try again, and Memphis cleared them for another localizer runway 36 approach. But that's been over 20 minutes ago, and I haven't heard anything since then." Again, I quickly responded, "I'll call flight service and see what they say. I'll talk to you when I find out more." The flight service confirmed that the Citation Floyd and Junior flew, reported a missed approach, and were approved for a second approach to Harrison, but radio contact had been lost shortly after they reported Backy, the outer marker, and NDB radio fix inbound. I called Ted back and told him that I would be right in. Before leaving home, I called a friend, Greg Walker. "Greg, one of my pilots, Junior Devine, is missing and may have crashed in the Citation he was flying. I'm driving to the airport to see if I can figure out what happened. Would you like to come along?" Greg said, "Sure, stop by, I'll go with you." On the way to town, I was thinking about the localizer runway 36 approach. I considered they might have descended too low on their second attempt and crashed short of the runway. I picked up Greg, and when we arrived at the airport, I made a series of telephone calls to determine if the pilots had made any other communications. I called Steve Redford, the owner of the Citation. "Steve, have you heard anything from Floyd, Syke, or Junior?" "Devine," Steve said, "No, not since we got off here at the School of the Ozarks earlier today, and that was the last time I saw either of them." I reported, "I've talked with flight service, and your aircraft is reported missing. We're conducting a search now to determine what has happened. Your Citation made an approach to attempt a landing here over an hour ago, and no one, including the flight service station, has heard anything since. We hope they may have chosen an alternate airport and just failed to close their flight plan." "I'll drive on down and help in the search," was Steve's alarmed response. On the hope that Junior and Floyd may have landed at another airport, I called and talked to Junior's wife, Debbie. "Debbie, have you heard anything from JR?" "No," she replied. I didn't want to upset her, although I could tell that this call unnerved her. I continued, "They made an approach here in Harrison, but didn't land due to low weather conditions. I was hoping Junior might have called you after using an alternate airport. They may have gone to Flippin. Try Flippin. They may have landed at Flippin. Have you checked over there?" Debbie considered Junior very resourceful and knew occasionally he had landed in Flippin when the ceilings were too low for Harrison. The field elevation there was better than 500 feet below the Harrison Airport that was 1,374 feet above mean sea level. My reply, "No, I've checked only with flight service. I will call over and see if they might have landed in Flippin. Then I'll report to you whatever I find out." My call to Flippin requesting the local law officials to check at the unattended airport had negative results. There was no Citation on the field. My follow-up report to Debbie Devine was not a pleasant task. Being unsuccessful with the telephone, I decided on to walk out their probable path for the final approach to the airport. Greg and I drove to Highway 2 and 6 at a point directly south of the Boone County Airport and prepared to walk the probable path an aircraft would take on its final approach to landing. We began our walk north in the grassy and brushy fields toward the airport, hoping to find something. It was a nasty, wet, foggy night, and there were no reflections from the lights of town. The darkness and fog made it difficult to see even a few feet ahead of us. Considering that I might never see Junior alive again, I began thinking back to how our lives first became involved. At the latter part of 1981, Boone County Aviation, Inc. had been successful in attaining its bid for the fixed base operation in Harrison. 2 years prior, this corporation had been formed to operate as a flying club. Two principals formed it: Jim Watt, a local minister and a flight instructor, and myself, Gene Lair, a pilot and a real estate broker. We had planned for the rapid growth of the corporation to accomplish these tasks. We put together a multiplex plan to raise needed capital and find qualified people to perform this operation. We wanted a good flight department for our operation. We discussed with David Christensen the possibility of his heading our flight department. However, we were concerned that he had very little fixed wing time, and his charter experience had been primarily as helicopter pilot, operating in the Chicago area. 2 months into the start date for our fixed base activities, we had endured a few setbacks. The previous fixed base operator had filed a lawsuit to try and hold his position. He had filed this suit against the county airport commissioners and Boone County Aviation, Inc. He had maintained possession of the county building and facilities and would not allow us to operate on the premises. Judge McCorkindale finally ruled against this previous operator, Quality Aviation, and in favor of Boone County Aviation and the airport commissioners. We then expanded our corporation through the sale of stock to 9 new stockholders and obtained a line of credit with an out-of-town bank. We bought fuel equipment, a jet fuel truck, office equipment, lobby furniture, and shop equipment within the shop. We then hired a variety of personnel as needed. We had become aware of J.R. Devine's availability for our position as chief pilot and director of operations. Mr. Devine had a wife and 2 children and had been flying for the previous operator, Quality Aviation. JR's resume of thousands of hours of successful aviation experience and a widely ranging involvement in the operations of small, single, and twin-engine aircraft, along with his positive attitude, encouraged us to accept him to handle our task. Junior became our chief pilot and director of flight operations. We then notified David Christensen that we had made this selection and would no longer need his services. Junior proved very industrious and set about immediate efforts in heading our flight department. We purchased 2 additional aircraft and leased a twin-engine Baron. Our fleet had now been enlarged to a total of 6 aircraft. Within a year, we had lost one of our small single aircraft in a local accident. A renter pilot had crashed on our local runway. We then acquired another aircraft, a leased twin, a Piper Seneca II, a type that Junior had recommended. In 1984, we added another aircraft to our fleet under a management contract. This was a King Air that was owned by Guarantee Savings and Loan. Our corporation sent Junior to Wichita, Kansas, and he was instructed in Beechcraft King Air flight training program. The King Air was adapted to our 135 charter flight program. It was not uncommon to find myself in an argument with Junior, as did other employees and company workers. He was adamant on doing things his way. On 2 different occasions over the period Junior worked for Boone County Aviation, he got into verbal conflicts with other personnel to the point of no reconciliation. And I was forced on 2 occasions to make a choice between J.R. and his adversary. In both of these occasions, I chose in favor of keeping Junior and letting his adversary, the lesser valued employee, go. Our director of flight operations had earned a reputation as headstrong. When he decided on something, it was difficult, if not impossible, to change his opinion. Despite these problems and the disagreements he and I personally had, I still had a great deal of respect for his skills and his value to our company, and over his years with us, I had found him extremely loyal, beneficial to important company goals and objectives. I remember one evening a charter had popped up requesting us to dispatch a twin-engine aircraft to Denver, Colorado to pick an individual. The individual was an employee of Harrison Gold and Silver, a commodities company that was locally operated by Nick Garino. I had personally reviewed the weather and calculated the price for this trip about $1,680. I argued, Junior, we ought to forget this trip. This weather is really crappy, with a solid squall line between here and Denver having cloud tops of over 48,000 feet. Besides, Nick might walk on the bill. We need the trip, and I want to take it. J.R. was firm. Junior's wife was an employee of Nick, and he felt more comfortable than I did with Nick's ethics. I felt about Nick as I would a mafia character, and for all I knew, he might have been mafia connected. He was fat, arrogant, and always spoke with a sarcastic manner. When I think of Nick, I remember him in his new Rolls-Royce with his look-alike ugly bulldog in the front seat beside him. I had been in his home. It had computers in practically every room. His home had 2 swimming pools, one indoor, the other in the shape of a $sign that was outside. Outside were 2 satellites receiving antennas so he could monitor the Hong Kong market reports and other commodity information with his computers. I did not feel comfortable with Mr. Garino. I pleaded with Junior, "You have already put in a long day and this will be a tiring trip. At least let me or some other pilot go as your company pilot. This would give you some rest." "No thanks. I don't want someone riding with me who would want to turn around and come back when it gets rough out there." "Okay, JR, we'll let you do it your way, but I really think you should turn this one down for general safety principles." He made the flight successfully and we did get paid. I never heard directly from him about the conditions of the flight, but through a conversation he had with another pilot, it was repeated to me that he had considered the trip almost his limit. Sometimes I felt he was testing for his limits. He had made a casual remark to me one time that when I die, it will probably be suddenly in a high-performance aircraft. On another flight situation, Junior and I had completed a check run and had delivered checks from 8 banks in this region to Little Rock, making ground deliveries at 3 major banks in the Federal Reserve Center. Junior had flown down on this trip and I was to fly back to Harrison. I checked the weather for our return with the local flight service station on field at Adams Field there in Little Rock. I did not like the information that I had received and considered it unsafe due to a cold front had passed Harrison and was moving toward Little Rock. It was followed by a squall line of widely spread high-intensity thunderstorms, carrying numerous embedded thunder cells. With a departure as planned, we could expect to strike this activity about Marshall, Arkansas. Getting back into the aircraft, I asked Junior, "Did you look at the weather?" He responded, "Looks okay to me." I said, "You know we've completed our mission, and I think it would be prudent if we sat this one out for the 2 hours it would take for a frontal passage here in Little Rock. I'd be happy to buy our supper at the Cajun's Wharf." No. A person can always make excuses. I want to go on through. Besides, some people would pay good money for this type of excitement, and as we departed the Little Rock area, the departure control handed us over to Memphis Center. The center controller, upon accepting us into his airspace, asked, "Have you checked your weather?" I was flying and Junior responded, "Affirmative, we are satisfied." This, I'm sure, was not what center wanted to hear. The air traffic controller working out of Memphis called us again a few minutes later as we were progressing toward the thunderstorm to warn us, "I'm picking up heavy thunderstorm, echoes 30 miles to your northwest. I would recommend for you a vector to your west around through the Russellville area that should give you a smoother ride." Junior responded, "Negative, we want to continue on direct." The controller replied, "Okay, but you are going into some heavy and extremely turbulent activity." I argued with Junior, "What do you mean negative? Why not go with their suggestion and go by Russellville? For my part, go back to Little Rock and wait this one out. I'm paying the bills and it won't hurt my feelings or my pocketbook to spend the extra time and money on this. They would send you to Timbuktu if you let them." We continued against my better judgment. The patter of rain on the metal body of our aircraft began lightly, then with steadily increasing intensity, it became a pounding. Torrential rain forcing a showery spray of water through and around the joints of the doors and windows. We were now inside this mature and violent cloud formation. Our small aircraft was under the control of a variety of air movements, pushing the small craft from side to side and up and down with the violence of a bucking bronco. My attempts of control were falling out of sync with the abrupt and capricious wind velocities within this volatile thunderstorm. Both Junior and I were fighting the controls, even though it felt impossible. Control by instruments now required our complete attention. We had no outside visible assurance of our in-flight posture. It was like riding a wild horse with a bag over your head. It was questionable whether we were winning or losing the battle of control. Stresses on seatbelt restraints were being forced to near their limits. We were blinded by jolts of lightning followed by ear-splitting blasts of thunder. Minutes stretched into what seemed like terrifying hours. Finally, we reached an area of less violence and a gradual calm begins to replace the turbulence. Then steadily the flight conditions began improving and becoming normal. Now we were on the backside of the cell and clear of the frontal condition. I sighed with relief. What had seemed like hours were in actuality only about 10 to 15 minutes. And 13,380, how was your ride? Came Memphis Center's query to us. Junior responded, but I couldn't hear his comment. We arrived back in Harrison all intact. I have never had the desire to duplicate this type of thrill since that night. I have read many accident reports where good pilots operating equal or superior aircraft have lost wings due to the extreme stresses created and crashed to the ground in fatal accidents in this type of weather. And I have had no desire to prove my superiority to Mother Nature. We had reached the airport now without a hint of the citation. It was possible that due to the very low poor visibility and total darkness, we could have walked near the aircraft wreckage without being able to see it. It was late now, well after midnight. We talked with others back at the Boone County Aviation Operations that had similar luck and not found anything. We then decided to give up the search for the night and continue in the morning with the help of the Civil Air Patrol and the FAA who were to be in town. Early the next morning there was no rain, but still cloudy with forecasts for early morning clearing. A number of different groups had gathered to conduct the search for the missing aircraft and crew members. The Civil Air Patrol and the FAA were on hand to conduct this search. They began an intelligence operation to assemble all known data about what may have happened. Shirley Bell, a local realtor who lived near Pilot's Knob, called and telling of an explosion she heard and felt that was near the time that their second approach was to have taken place. Due to persisting low clouds, it was after 9 a.m. before search planes could get airborne, and it was after 10 a.m. that the crew on our four-place Cessna Skyhawk radioed a sighting of the wreckage. The citation had cut a path through the dense growth of trees and came to rest near the base of a stone bluff that jutted upward about 80 to 100 feet above the crash site. The top of this bluff was near the top of Pilot's Knob, a small mountain a little more than 3 miles west of the Boone County Regional Airport. Following receipt of this information, we drove as far as we could on up a county gravel road leading up Pilot's Knob toward where we understood the crash site to be. We then walked through the brush and cow paths the rest of the way. Several news agencies with camera crews were already on the scene to inspect and talk to some of the people who came up to the scene. The tail section appeared intact. The fuselage was bent. The wings were demolished. The front section of the aircraft that enclosed the cockpit was badly burned. The exterior of aluminum skin that should have covered the cockpit had melted away, exposing the grotesque view of the charred remains of the two pilots. Debbie Devine had reached the scene ahead of me, and her agonizing screams after sighting her dead husband were heart-wrenching. And during this gruesome scene, I tried to imagine why this accident had occurred. This was well off the normal path for their last Localizer 36 approach. My mind went back in time to review and consider the possible error that had caused this tragedy. Floyd Sykes, now 53 years old, had received his flight training in the Navy. He had been trained as pilot for a Navy fighter jet. It had been his job to fly a Navy fighter jet as a combat pilot. The highly precision and difficult task of takeoffs and landings on an aircraft carrier deck had been a routine for Floyd. Now in his civilian life, he served Steve Redford as the chief pilot. He was in command and sat in the left seat of the Citation, a high-performance twin-engine jet aircraft manufactured by Cessna. His earlier training and background had prepared him for this job. Steve Redford, the aircraft owner, had hired him and considered Floyd among the best available pilots capable of protecting the Redford investment and lives of those who were to ride on board this modern high-speed method of corporate transportation. Earlier that day, Floyd arranged with J.R. Devine to fly right seat as his co-pilot for the trips did plan for the day, since Ron Archer, his usual co-pilot, was unavailable. Floyd expressed some concern to Karen, Secretary of Boone County Aviation, about the trip plan that day. While making these arrangements, he told Karen that over the previous weekend, his lady friend's mother had given him an ultimatum. Floyd had been dating a lady lawyer who lived in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Floyd said to Karen, "She told me that I have been dating her daughter for over a year now and that I should either marry her or let her go." He had talked to Karen before about his woman and told Karen that he loved her but hadn't decided that he could tolerate her 2 children in the same house. Floyd was perturbed about this weekend experience as well as the inclement weather forecast for the trips planned. He then told Karen, "If I don't make it back, please tell my lady that I did love her and that I intended to marry her." Junior Devine, 39 years old, was not the regular co-pilot but was selected today to replace the unavailable Ron Archer, who usually served as co-pilot. Also was among the best in piloting skills. JRS flight education had not been as formal or as costly as Floyd's had, but it had uniquely qualified him. His skills had been derived from a variety of jobs throughout his career. He had operated numerous aircraft in a number of commercial aviation jobs, and as a charter pilot, and for then 3 years he had served as chief pilot for Boone County Aviation, Inc. In addition, he had served as pilot in command for jobs involving the use of numerous small general aviation aircraft based in Arkansas, California, Canada, and Mexico. Junior had been a bush pilot in Canada, in addition to having flown as a crop duster pilot for 2 years in Mexico. His was rated as a commercial pilot for single and twin-engine aircraft. A certified flight instructor, including an instrument instructor. His logbook claimed over 10,000 flight hours. The weather at the time of their attempted landing was reported at 500 overcast, visibility 2 miles in rain and fog. This was a minimum condition for landing at this airport, and although not highly accommodating, it was a job the men had been trained for, and their aircraft with its sophisticated electronic navigation systems was designed to handle. Making an instrument approach in foggy and rainy weather requires the complete and dedicated attention of the pilots and the faithful marriage of the men and their machine. The approach procedure they were using would have brought them into the airport area first using the VOR, a very high frequency transmitter, to navigate. The VOR is located 4.4 miles northwest of the center of the runway. The next phase was to use the VOR to direct them to the NDB, a non-directional beacon, a low-frequency transmitter to place them about 5 miles south of runway 36 on the reverse course of the localizer. Then they would continue outbound for a couple of miles at an altitude of 3,800 feet, then turn into a procedure turn first to southeast for 1 minute, then back to the northwest on an interception course until centering the localizer, another high-frequency precise navigational aid beam, then at that time turn back north adjusting for wind to remain centered on the localizer. They were to descend to 2,700 by reaching the NDB back here. Again, at that point, they should begin letting down to 1,840 feet to the minimum descent altitude before reaching the airport. They were not to go below 1,840 feet until, if they were able to see the runway and with sufficient runway remaining, they would let down and land. They were almost successful on their first approach. However, they were too far down the length of the runway to make a safe landing, so they opted for a missed approach and asked for another approach instead of calling for an alternate airport. Again, they went back to the VOR that requires a receiver setting of 112.5. If they had not been cleared for a second approach, this would have become their holding fix for a holding pattern at 500 feet according to the missed approach procedures. Memphis Center cleared them for a second approach. They proceeded outbound with the citation as described, only this time they apparently failed to change the frequency of their inbound tracking frequency from 112.5, the ER, to 111.7, the localizer. They reported crossing the NDB inbound and called this out to Memphis Center. Citation in, "We've crossed back inbound on the localizer 36 approach to Harrison," said an onboard pilot. It is possible that both pilots may have been looking outside the aircraft for lights, runway lights, and other identifying features. Their attention may have been diverted from the ADF needle that probably was showing that they were proceeding west of the desired course. They may have failed to verify the frequency they were monitoring and failed to reset the frequency from the VOR at 112.5 when they were executing a missed approach to the localizer at 111.7, the one they should have been on, to detect their position in relationship to the localizer signal. Centering the needle for the VOR would have established their path directly toward pilot's knob. The pilots died not because the needles lied, but most likely because they were monitoring the wrong signal. They appeared to have been tracking the VOR when they were using the Localizer 36 approach. A Localizer 36 procedure allowed them to descend to minimum altitude of 1,840 feet after crossing Baki on the proper procedure. But they were probably in error with the VOR frequency and proceeded over 3 miles west of the runway at a point where the terrain of Pilot's Knob rose up to 2,090 feet MSL. This was a fatal mistake. If it was a game or a simulator, you might say, "I'm sorry, I really meant to use the localizer frequency, let me try again." Many times in real life, you only have one shot to do it right. The pilots' lives ended abruptly with this accident, and the lives of all those who were involved in this search were changed in varying degrees. Debbie Devine, Jr.'s wife, battled with the insurance company to obtain a settlement in addition to receiving the death benefits for the loss of her husband from workman's compensation. Her children have been raised without a father. Steve Redford never bought another aircraft to replace the Citation he lost. He was a highly successful real estate entrepreneur. Among his achievements, having sold a site to the famous Palace Theater in Branson, the developer of Point Royale. His operations included directing numerous timeshare sales, lot sales, and sales of condominiums in the Branson area. Steve later was convicted for arranging what was said to be the largest bankruptcy fraud in the U.S. history. It was reported that he gave states evidence in the sentencing of Missouri Attorney General Bill Webster to help lighten his prison term. Boone County Aviation suffered severe financial penalties due to the loss of their chief pilot. A minor aspect, the King Air that Jr. had been trained to fly did not have a pilot to continue its operations. However, this would not have lasted long due to the federal government's closing of Guarantee Savings and Loan, which resulted in the sale of the King Air. Many changes took place because of the accident, but life goes on for the living. The end. Herb Blair, Senior Business Development Consultant. Cell 870-3655436. HerbBlairConsultant.com.LinkedIn profile. HTTPS. www.linkedin.com/n/herblairbee/website. HTTPS. sites.google.com/sites/current/home. Facebook www.facebook.com/herb.lair. Twitter.com/herblair. Help improve contributions. Mark contributions as unhelpful.